Tommy Malone was a boy from Liverpool's toughest streets, but he would become the city's most feared gangster, ruling an empire built on violence, deception, and ruthless ambition. Behind his cold exterior lay secrets that no one saw coming, secrets that would ignite betrayals and spark a downfall so dramatic it would shake Liverpool to its core. This is the story of power, loyalty, and the price of betrayal, the rise and fall of a man who once seemed unstoppable. Liverpool in the 1970s was a city caught between its proud past and a grim future. The once bustling docks, which had driven the city's economy for decades, were now a shadow of their former selves. Factories closed, jobs vanished, and communities fell into poverty. In these desperate times, the streets became dangerous places where survival meant more than just hard work. It meant knowing how to fight, how to steal, and how to avoid the law. It was in this harsh environment that Tommy Malone was born. Tommy's childhood was far from easy. Raised in one of Liverpool's poorest neighborhoods, he grew up in a cramped, rundown apartment with his mother and 3 siblings. His father was absent, leaving the family to struggle against the rising tide of unemployment and crime. From a young age, Tommy was forced to face the brutal realities of his world. Schools were overcrowded and underfunded, and many of the children in his neighborhood had already turned to gangs and petty crime before their teens. Tommy was no different. Before he even reached his teenage years, he had learned to fight and steal to survive. The streets were his playground, but also his battleground. Friends came and went, some falling victim to violence, others getting arrested or disappearing. But Tommy was different. He had a certain sharpness and fearlessness that set him apart. He watched carefully, learning from older kids who ran small-time scams and burglaries. He wasn't content to just follow. Even at a young age, he wanted to lead. Life was a constant struggle, but Tommy's natural instincts helped him navigate the dangers around him. He quickly gained a reputation for being tough and clever, earning respect among his peers. But behind this tough exterior was a boy shaped by pain and loss. The absence of his father, the endless fights at home, and the threat of violence outside created a hardened resolve. Tommy didn't just want to survive, he wanted to rise above the squalor and chaos that surrounded him. Little did anyone know, the seeds of something far bigger were already being planted. The boy who grew up running from bullies and dodging the police would one day become Liverpool's most feared gangster, a man whose name alone would send chills down the spines of both criminals and law enforcement alike. But for now, Tommy Malone was just a product of the streets, raw, hungry, and ready to make his mark. Tommy Malone's early years in crime were marked by small, risky moves that earned him street credibility. By the time he was a teenager, he had already fallen in with a local gang involved in smuggling and petty theft. The docks of Liverpool, with their maze of containers and warehouses, were perfect for moving goods unnoticed, and Tommy quickly learned how to navigate this shadowy world. It was a dangerous game. One misstep could mean a prison sentence, or worse. But Tommy had something many others lacked: boldness. At 19, Tommy wasn't content with being just another small-time player. He wanted to climb higher, to take control. The gang he belonged to was planning a shipment of stolen electronics, a valuable haul that promised to bring in a hefty payday. Tommy saw an opportunity, not just to profit, but to prove himself. He suggested a daring plan. Instead of the usual routine, they would hit 2 rival crews at once, securing the shipment before anyone else even knew it was moving. The plan was risky, and many hesitated. But Tommy's confidence convinced them. On the night of the heist, his careful preparation and quick thinking paid off. The gang intercepted the shipment, overpowering the rivals without firing a shot. The stolen goods were quickly fenced, doubling the expected profits. The success was a turning point. Suddenly, Tommy was no longer just another face in the crowd. He was a rising star, someone to be watched. But success came with a price. The rival gangs didn't forget the loss, and tensions flared. What had started as simple street smarts turned into a game of power and survival. Tommy's name began circulating among Liverpool's criminal circles. whispered with both fear and respect. He was bold, unpredictable, and willing to do whatever it took to win. This earned him new enemies but also new allies, those who saw potential in his ambition. At the same time, Tommy learned the value of loyalty and betrayal. Some friends stuck by him, while others watched for chances to undermine his growing influence. His instinct for reading people became sharper, and his ability to stay one step ahead grew. The stakes were rising, and Tommy knew that this was only the beginning. The streets that had shaped him were now his domain, but to truly survive and thrive, he would need be smarter and even more ruthless. The boy from Liverpool's roughest neighborhoods was becoming a man who could control the city's darkest corners, and the city was about to change forever. By the early 1980s, Tommy Malone had moved far beyond the small-time hustles of his youth. His daring heist had marked the beginning of a transformation from street kid to criminal mastermind. But Tommy wasn't interested in just surviving or making quick cash anymore. He wanted to build something lasting, something powerful. He set his sights on expanding his reach across Liverpool and beyond, using every tool at his disposal. Tommy's rise was fueled by an ever-growing appetite for control. He began organizing his operations with ruthless efficiency, overseeing drug trafficking routes, protection rackets, and illegal gambling. His crews were well-disciplined, and loyalty was rewarded, but betrayal was met with swift and brutal consequences. Tommy understood that to build an empire, fear was as important as money. One of his first big moves was to gain control over several clubs and bars in the city. These places became hubs for his operations, safe spaces where deals were made and enemies watched. Tommy wasn't just a gangster, he was a businessman who knew the importance of appearances. He invested in real estate and legitimate businesses, blurring the line between legal and illegal. This helped him launder money and gain influence in circles far removed from the streets. Tommy's network expanded rapidly. He connected with suppliers in other cities, built alliances with smaller gangs, and bribed key figures to protect his interests. His name became synonymous with power in Liverpool's underworld. Rival criminals spoke of him with caution, and law enforcement officers whispered about the growing challenge he represented. Tommy was untouchable, not because he was invisible, but because he had carefully woven himself into the fabric of the city. Despite his growing empire, Tommy remained hands-on. He visited his crews personally, handled disputes, and was involved in the planning of every major deal. His reputation for boldness and cold calculation grew alongside his wealth. People feared crossing him, but some also admired his ability to rise from nothing and control a vast, dangerous network. Yet, as his empire grew, so did the risks. The more power Tommy wielded, the more enemies he made, both inside and outside his organization. Paranoia crept in, and trust became a rare commodity. The man who once fought to survive was now fighting to maintain everything he had built. But deep down, Tommy believed his empire was unstoppable, until a secret from his past and the betrayals brewing around him would threaten to destroy it all. Tommy Malone's power soon stretched far beyond the criminal world. As his empire grew, he began to infiltrate the very institutions that were supposed to keep him in check. Politicians, police officers, and local businessmen all found themselves drawn into his orbit, whether by fear, money, or mutual benefit. Tommy understood that to stay untouchable, he needed influence in places where no gun or threat could reach. He started by investing in legitimate businesses, nightclubs, casinos, and even property developments across Liverpool. These ventures gave him a respectable front and helped him launder the vast sums of money flowing through his criminal enterprises. But they were more than just money makers. They became meeting points for deals and alliances. The owners and managers who worked for Tommy were loyal, knowing refusal could mean more than just losing a job. Tommy's charm and intelligence helped him navigate this dangerous terrain. He was far from the stereotypical gangster. He dressed well, spoke confidently, and knew how to play the political game. Over time, he cultivated relationships with influential city officials and police officers, some of whom turned a blind eye to his activities in exchange for cash or favors. His nickname, the Liverpool Ghost, came from his uncanny ability to evade prosecution despite constant police investigations. The media was fascinated but powerless to pin anything on him. Rumors swirled about his connections and his reach, but nothing was ever proven. To the public, he was a shadowy figure, a man behind the scenes pulling strings but never showing his face. This aura only made him more dangerous, as people feared what they couldn't see or understand. But this kind of power came with a price. Tommy's moves made him a target not just for law enforcement, but also for rival gangs eager to take his place. His influence sparked resentment among those who had long controlled parts of Liverpool's criminal world. Internal tensions within his own organization began to surface, as some members grew jealous or distrustful of his increasing control. Despite the growing dangers, Tommy held tight to his empire. His ability to blend crime with politics, money, and respectability made him nearly invincible. He was no longer just a gangster. He was a kingpin ruling from the shadows. But in this game, trust was fragile, and the higher he climbed, the more precarious his throne became. Unknown to Tommy, forces were already gathering to bring him down, and those closest to him might be the ones who would deal the final blow. With Tommy Malone's empire at its peak, the cracks beneath the surface began to show. The very network that had made him powerful now became a source of vulnerability. Rival gangs, once wary of his dominance, started plotting against him, eager to reclaim territory and weaken his grip on Liverpool. But the most dangerous threat didn't come from outside, it came from within. Tommy's inner circle was carefully chosen, made up of loyal lieutenants who had grown with him from the early days. Yet, as the stakes grew higher, so did the temptations and pressures. Money and power can change people, and trust, once sacred, became fragile. Unseen by Tommy, one of his closest allies was secretly working with law enforcement, feeding police key information about their operations. This betrayal was the beginning of a slow, deadly unraveling. Paranoia crept into Tommy's mind. He noticed strange slips, plans that leaked, shipments intercepted, and deals falling apart without explanation. He began to question everyone around him, unsure who was still loyal and who was a traitor. This fear made him ruthless, punishing even minor mistakes harshly. The atmosphere in his organization shifted from loyalty to suspicion, and the sense of unity that had built his empire started to dissolve. Meanwhile, police pressure intensified. Armed with inside information, law enforcement made targeted raids that disrupted Tommy's operations. Several trusted members of his gang were arrested, turning the once tightly knit network into a fractured group struggling to stay afloat. Each arrest sent shockwaves through the criminal world, signaling that even Tommy Malone, the Liverpool Ghost, was no longer invincible. The betrayal hit harder because Tommy never saw it coming. The man feeding information to the police had been with him for years, a trusted brother in arms. The revelation shook Tommy to his core, forcing him to confront the reality that his empire was crumbling from the inside out. It wasn't just business. It was personal. As Tommy tried to root out the traitor, he realized that his greatest challenge was no longer rival gangs or police hunts. It was the battle for loyalty within his own ranks. The stakes were higher than ever, and the man who had once ruled the city from the shadows was now fighting for his very survival. The war was no longer about power, it was about trust, betrayal, and how far one would go to protect everything built on blood and secrets. Behind the ruthless exterior that made Tommy Malone feared and respected across Liverpool was a secret few knew. The secret that shaped Liverpool was a secret few knew. The secret that shaped much of who he had become. Years before he rose to power, Tommy's family had been torn apart by a tragedy that haunted him every day. His younger sister, Sarah, disappeared without a trace when they were both children, a loss that left a permanent scar on Tommy's soul. Sarah was the bright light in their troubled household, a reminder of innocence in a world filled with hardship. When she vanished, Tommy's world shifted. The police investigation went nowhere, and the neighborhood whispered about what might have happened, but no answers came. The loss shattered Tommy's family and left him with a deep sense of guilt and helplessness. He blamed himself for not protecting her, for being just a boy who couldn't stop the darkness creeping into their lives. This personal tragedy became the hidden fuel behind Tommy's hunger for power and control. The streets had taken Sarah away from him, and he vowed never to feel powerless again. Crime wasn't just a way to survive, it was a way to dominate a world that had once crushed him. Every deal, every fight, every act of violence was a step toward making sure nothing like that could happen to him or those he cared about again. Yet, this secret also made Tommy vulnerable in ways no one expected. It was a private pain he buried beneath layers of anger and ambition, rarely showing it to anyone. Those closest to him noticed moments of bitterness and rage that didn't quite fit with his calculated nature, but they never understood the true cause. The disappearance of his sister remained a ghost haunting his past, influencing his decisions without anyone fully realizing how deeply. As Tommy's empire expanded, the shadow of Sarah's disappearance loomed larger. Some say it was the reason he was so ruthless, an attempt to fill the void left behind. Others believe that it was the crack in his armor, the secret that made him human beneath the hardened gangster image. This hidden truth also made Tommy's eventual downfall more tragic. While he built an empire of fear and control, he was still chasing answers that never came. The man who seemed unstoppable was driven by a pain no money or power could fix. A secret that once revealed would shock the city and change everything. Tommy Malone's empire, once thought invincible, began to show signs of crumbling as law enforcement closed in. The turning point came with the interception of a massive drug shipment destined to fuel his growing empire. This shipment was supposed to solidify his dominance, bringing in millions and reinforcing his grip on Liverpool's streets. But instead, it became the catalyst for a police crackdown that would shake the underworld to its core. The raid was swift and precise. Armed officers seized the shipment and arrested several key members of Tommy's organization. This wasn't just a small bust, it was a major blow that sent ripples through the criminal network. With inside information from the traitor within his ranks, the police had managed to dismantle a significant part of his operations. For the first time, Tommy's carefully built world was exposed and vulnerable. The public was stunned. For years, Tommy had seemed untouchable, a ghost haunting the city's dark corners but always out of reach. Now, the police were hitting back hard. His businesses were scrutinized, his money trails followed, and his allies questioned. The pressure was relentless. Every move Tommy made was watched, every contact investigated. The once hidden empire was unraveling in plain sight. As arrests piled up, trust among Tommy's crew began to crumble. Fear spread quickly, and many started to doubt if loyalty was still worth the risk. Some members turned informant, hoping to save themselves. The sense of unity that had kept the empire strong was replaced by suspicion and paranoia. Tommy, who had always been a step ahead, found himself on the defensive. Forced into hiding, Tommy became a shadow of his former self. His contacts dwindled, his power waned, and his enemies grew bolder. The city he once controlled now seemed to close in around him. Despite his attempts to regroup and strike back, the damage was done. The empire that had been his life was slipping away. The raid and its aftermath marked the beginning of the end. The man who had risen from the streets to rule Liverpool's criminal world was now a hunted figure. His downfall was no longer a question of if, but when. And as the walls closed in, the secret betrayals and hidden enemies that had long lurked beneath the surface were about to come crashing down, sealing Tommy Malone's fate and changing Liverpool forever. The revelation of the traitor within Tommy Malone's inner circle struck like a lightning bolt, sudden, violent, and devastating. The man who had once been one of Tommy's most trusted allies was exposed as the informant who had fed police critical information for months. This betrayal wasn't just a professional blow, it was deeply personal. Tommy had considered this man family, someone who had stood by him through countless battles. Now that bond was shattered. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Tommy's response was swift and merciless, sending a clear message that betrayal would not be tolerated. But the damage had already been done. The organization, once tightly knit and loyal, was fractured by suspicion and fear. No one knew who could be trusted anymore. Friends became enemies overnight, and alliances that had seemed unbreakable turned to dust. The tension exploded in a violent showdown at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Liverpool. It was here that Tommy taunted the traitor and his loyal followers in a desperate attempt to regain control. The confrontation turned deadly, with bullets flying and blood spilled. Several men died that night, their bodies left behind as grim reminders of the cost of betrayal. Though Tommy survived the massacre, he was far from victorious. The violent purge weakened his organization, scattering his remaining loyalists and making it harder to hold on to his empire. The betrayal had not only cost lives, but also shattered the illusion of invincibility that had surrounded him. For the first time, Tommy's power was openly challenged, not just by rival gangs or the police, but from within his own ranks. This internal war left Tommy isolated and vulnerable. Paranoia consumed him, making him question every word and every move around him. Trust, once his greatest asset, became his greatest weakness. The fear of betrayal haunted his every decision, slowing his actions and clouding his judgment. His empire was crumbling from the inside out. The bloody showdown marked a turning point in Tommy's reign. The man who had ruled Liverpool's underworld with an iron fist was now a leader fighting for survival. His enemies sensed weakness, and the city began to shift beneath his feet. The final chapters of Tommy Malone's story were unfolding, filled with violence, deceit, and a desperate fight to hold on to power that was slipping through his fingers. Cornered and desperate, Tommy Malone knew his empire was collapsing, and with the police closing in and enemies multiplying, he decided to take one last bold risk. His plan was audacious: to fake his own death and disappear from Liverpool forever. Tommy believed that by vanishing, he could escape the relentless pressure of law enforcement and gang rivals, and possibly rebuild his life elsewhere under a new identity. It was a gamble that matched the daring moves he had made throughout his rise, but this time the stakes were higher than ever. The plan involved careful coordination with trusted associates, who would spread false reports of Tommy's death in a violent shootout. A staged scene was set: bloody clothes, a burned-out car, and witnesses ready to tell the story. For a moment, it seemed to work. News of Tommy Malone's death shocked the city, spreading rapidly through the streets and media. Police began to scale back their efforts, believing the kingpin was gone. But faking death is a tricky business, especially when your enemies are as cunning as Tommy's had become. Rumors started swirling that the whole thing was a hoax, that Tommy was still alive and hiding. Rival gangs refused to believe he was truly gone, and some even sought to use the confusion to stake their claim on his territory. Meanwhile, law enforcement kept digging, unwilling to close the case without solid proof. It wasn't long before the plan unraveled. A slip-up in communication, a careless associate, or simply the relentless work of detectives, finally exposed the truth. Tommy Malone was alive. The revelation sent shockwaves through Liverpool once again. The man they thought was dead was very much alive, and more dangerous than ever. With nowhere left to run, Tommy became a prime target. Police launched a dramatic raid on a safe house where he was hiding. The operation was swift and overwhelming. Tommy was arrested and taken into custody. His empire, already in tatters, crumbled overnight. The man who had once ruled Liverpool's underworld was now behind bars. His reign ended not by a rival's bullet or a shootout, but by his own failed attempt at escape. Tommy Malone's final gambit failed spectacularly. His arrest marked the end of an era, and sent a clear message: no matter how high you rise or how clever you are, the fall can be swift and absolute. The city of Liverpool was left to reckon with the aftermath of his empire's collapse and the legacy of a man who had shaped its darkest chapter. Tommy Malone's arrest sent shockwaves through Liverpool, but it was only the beginning of the story. His downfall marked a turning point, not just for him, but for the entire city. For years, Tommy had cast a long shadow over Liverpool's streets, his influence touching everything from local businesses to law enforcement. With him behind bars, the criminal landscape was left in chaos, creating a power vacuum that many were eager to fill. In the immediate aftermath, rival